reason alone. Rajinder Minhas, 60 years old, from Oakland County, the owner of Lockhart Chemical, traded the public safety and the environmental safety of this community for money. That's it. On June 15, 2022, a 911 call came into Flint Dispatch. A gentleman fishing noticed a large oil slick at an outfall just east of I-475 on the Flint River. If you look at the map, you'll see exactly where Lockhart Chemical is through that red dot. And if you go directly east where that river bends, that's where the outfall is. The 911 caller stated that the water and the oil slick was so great that he knew it was more than just a small spillage. Immediately, the Flint Fire Department, my office, as the sheriff, I also operate as the emergency manager of the county. We dispatched our emergency management team. We contacted Michigan Spill Response, Eagle, EPA, all those that are here and represented today, to not only do two things: contain and to clean, and also to hold accountable. Right out of the gate, Captain Kennemer and Sergeant Josh Walker were assigned from my office to work with Eagle in their investigation to find out, was this an accident or was it deliberate? Was this just simple neglect, or was it neglect? Was it intentional? And is there criminal culpability? And that's exactly what we found. And while we're doing that, at the same time, we're trying to protect the waterway. Can I tell you, this crime scene spanned 22 miles. Our friends like Art Woodson, community activists, and others that have already suffered the trauma of what contaminated water could be. This is independent of that. This was just another example of what can happen if reckless and poor management is tolerated. And I can tell you, on that day, it wasn't. We were able to set up soft booms and hard booms. This is the outfall. You'll see that between the second and third boom, the orange, there's a line of demarcation where the oil and the water meets. All in all, our teams worked 12 to 16 hours a day for 3 weeks straight. And those soft booms and hard booms are put in all the way down the river. There were 4 sets of hard booms that siphon off the water in order to be vacuumed, and 10 sets of soft booms, which are the cloth booms, just to capture. Because of this contamination, within the first few days, they siphoned off 20,000 gallons of water, skimmed the top. In addition to all that, we continue to work with the source, Lockhart Chemical. 4300 block of James B. Cole, they make many of the ingredients that go into products like this: rust inhibitors. These are toxic chemicals. When we went to the site, I want you to see just a little bit of what we saw at the site. These are outside tanks. Look at the spillage underneath the tanks. Take note of the lack of care, knowing that that all seeps into the watershed. What we found in our investigation, that within 24 hours of us being on scene, that our friends from the EPA rushed, and I'm so thankful for them. EPA and Eagle, from the get-go, assigned full teams to investigate and to identify the source. They were able to fingerprint the volatile organic compounds that came from the source and tracked it back to Lockhart Chemical. So we knew we had our source. From that point, we secured the location, and we continued to work our case as we progressed as a cleanup and saw that we had waterfowl, we had aquatic animals that were contaminated, we had young turtles that were contaminated, that our friends and volunteers came and picked up, washed, and cleaned, and cared. At the same time, we're investigating and working with our investigative partners. Can I tell you, the health department from Genesee County, without any hesitation, and it wasn't very popular, especially during the July 4th weekend, to have a no contact order for the entire river. People couldn't kayak, they couldn't fish, they couldn't swim, they couldn't enjoy it. That's what happens when you have careless, reckless criminal behavior like we do in this case. You would think after all of this, our defendant would do what they could to try to help and mitigate, but he did the absolute opposite. He actually escalated. There's a point in August, 60 days after that false claims were made by the defendant. That in an interview, they stated that we needed records, and these records were submitted, and they weren't correct. Not only that, daily chemical spills, mismanagement. They had spills that were not cleaned. They had drains that instead of fixing, cement product was poured in. As we excavated this entire site, we saw one after another an example of premeditation. Many times it's a cover-up. What I found is most egregious is when we started pulling records. And if you looked at those containers, you would see that many of them, they generate tremendous amounts of heat. And there's a level that's set by manufacturers and EPA and Eagle, our Michigan Department of Environment, Great Lakes and Energy, that there are requirements and there are reporting requirements. And I saw with my own eyes records that were falsified at the order of the defendant. We have individuals from that company that were forced to make these adjustments to keep it under the 110 degrees Fahrenheit, when in fact it was some cases near 120 degrees. These are ticking time bombs for a community. I think it's worthy to note that in a community like us here in Flint, Genesee County, some may see that this is just an act of business, and it's not. These are people's lives. These are businesses. These are people's recreational endeavors. And when a company comes in, especially somebody who's not from this area and has no regard, knowing what Flint has just suffered in 2015 and 16, to do that, we're here today to answer. And I will tell you, it may have taken a long time, but when you have a case like this, an environmental criminal case, these aren't any case that I as a sheriff or a 32-year veteran are taught how to do. This is a walk a mile, see a mile case. But we can't do this alone. When you involve other credible investigators and scientists and people that are behind me, inside me today, this is how we got here. As I know that on that day, we claim to hold people accountable. I was in communication with our Attorney General from the beginning, our friends from Eagle, to take us to this day. When you have an Attorney General who's claimed, not only in this case, but in other cases, that she is going to stand by this community and hold people accountable, like in this case, I can tell you as a sheriff, that is a great relief. This is a collaboration. And I'm here to tell you that Dana Nessel, our Attorney General, never said no. She would take my calls on the weekends, she would take my calls in the evenings, and we kept pushing and pushing. And that shows tenacity. So again, I want to thank all those that responded from June 15, 2022, to those that are standing here today. These are not easy cases. And when you have a co-laborer of justice like our Attorney General, Dana Nessel, I get to say as a sheriff to this community, we promised protection, we promised accountability, and we have that. Ladies and gentlemen, Dana Nessel.
Thank you, Sheriff. And in response to that, I don't think you'd take no for an answer, even if that was what I suggested. No, I appreciate that introduction. Just to make everybody who's in the room aware, obviously, Genesee County Sheriff Chris Swanson is with us here today. Also with us here, the Department of Attorney General Criminal Justice Bureau Chief Daniel Hageman Clark, and we have some of our assistants attorneys general who worked on the case with us here, Greg Justice and Dan Grano, and also Sherry Meyer from the Water Resources Division of Eagle. So today, alongside with the sheriff, we're announcing criminal charges against Rajinder Singh Minhas, the president, treasurer, and director of Lockhart Chemical Company, for many significant felony and misdemeanor criminal offenses for the alleged mismanagement and neglect of critical maintenance and degradation of the Lockhart Chemical Company that resulted in the unauthorized oil discharge into the Flint River in 2022, and, as was mentioned by the sheriff, for illegal operation practices at the site in an attempt to cover up his criminal culpability in the discharge and other industrial material and waste management offenses discovered in the months that followed the discharge. Mr. Minhas was arrested at his home in Rochester and arraigned in the 67th Judicial District in Genesee County on Wednesday, December 18th. He was released on a personal recognizance bond pending a probable cause conference scheduled for January the 2nd. The totality of what I have to say and will describe today are at this point, of course, only allegations. All defendants at this stage of the criminal justice process are presumed innocent unless and until proven guilty in a court of law, though these allegations are extensively supported by the findings of the Michigan Department of Energy, Great Lakes, and Energy, and we intend to prove these offenses beyond any reasonable doubt in the courts. In addition, I would offer my gratitude not only to the talented attorneys and prosecutors in my office, some of whom, again, are with me here today, but also to the experts at Eagle, Michigan State Police, the Genesee County Sheriff's Office, the Oakland County Sheriff's Office, the special agents from my department, and the detectives of Eagle and DNR Environmental Investigation Section who developed and investigated this case. Now, Lockhart was a chemical processing facility that manufactured rust preventative additives used in the metalworking industry. And here, staff unloaded, stored, transferred, and blended raw materials to be crafted into rust preventatives and then shipped those chemical products to customers. These chemicals were stored on site in more than 100 tanks with a total volume of nearly 2 million gallons and up to 4,500 barrels on site. And this site stored raw materials which would be steam heated to liquefy the materials for chemical integration. These processes resulted in the creation of industrial wastewater comprised of stormwater, rinse water, material leakage, and steam condensate, all of which came into contact with chemicals and hazardous materials or containers for such. The neglectful management of this facility's wastewater and the containment systems falling into significantly degraded states led to an eventual and criminal pollution event that posed a danger to public water. On June 15th of 2022, approximately 15,000 gallons of an oil chemical mixture were released from Lockhart's facility into the Flint River. The discharge came from the facility's underground tunnel network for combined wastewater and flowed through the municipal storm sewer to an outlet into the Flint River caused by a tank valve leak. Upon noticing the chemical discharge to the river, emergency responders deployed booms to mitigate the pollution, and in the immediate investigation, Mr. Minhas denied that the oil chemical substance came from Lockhart and claimed the site was self-contained, that no pipe or drain system connected his chemical site to the storm sewer, and that simply was not true. The City of Flint and the Michigan Department of Environment, Great Lakes, and Energy quickly identified Lockhart as the source of the contamination, inspecting manhole access points to the sewer system immediately upstream of Lockhart and on the facility grounds. None of the upstream access points contained the chemical contaminant. Those at this site did. Furthermore, chemical fingerprinting analysis conducted by Eagle's investigators and laboratory confirmed that the oil chemical mixture entering the Flint River was a match to substances that were found on this site. This illegal discharge into the river was a direct result of Minhas as the director in charge of this facility's dangerous daily operations, repeatedly neglecting maintenance, refusing necessary facility upgrades, and failing to implement a preventative maintenance plan or provide annual emergency training for employees. These inadequate operations also led to criminal violations of Michigan's air pollution laws. So at the time, immediately following the chemical discharge, my department set out alongside Eagle to assess observations and complaints from the community, and the state gathered environmental data in response to the community feedback. Eagle initially sought voluntary compliance from Lockhart on several needed upgrades to facility integrity and other items necessary to come into compliance with state law, but After several meetings and efforts to prompt serious actions by Minhas and Lockhart yielded no solutions to the many problems discovered at the facility, an official order became necessary. And in September of 2022, 3 months after this illegal discharge, Eagle issued an order to Lockhart requiring the company to immediately stop its use of defective wastewater and stormwater conveyance systems, to pump the facility's wastewater and stormwater for off-site disposal, to maintain and monitor a boom in the Flint River where the illicit discharge reached the river, and to repair or replace defective conveyance systems. And that order was served upon Lockhart by my department, Eagle, and Genesee County Sheriff Chris Swanson. Lockhart soon after filed for bankruptcy, and officials from the state of Michigan and the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency have been involved in the bankruptcy to ensure that the facility is managed appropriately to avoid further releases and to address hazardous substances on site. So today, we are announcing significant felony and misdemeanor charges against the man responsible for mismanaging this company to the point of a public crisis. To underscore the culpability of Mr. Minhas, this facility had no safety managers on site daily. The only person in charge was Rajinder Minhas. Now, Mr. Minhas ran this chemical factory with a mentality geared towards keeping operational costs low and profits high, to patch bullet holes with Band-Aids and to keep the public safe with all the might and muster of a series of patchwork of bare minimum efforts. The business model at practice here led to criminal violations of Michigan's environmental laws, including falsifying records and covering up his dirty tracks. The bottom line is this: the industrial plant produced a chemical discharge into the Flint River and releases of air pollution because Rajinder Singh Minhas failed to secure his facility yet over and over again. Years of mismanagement and neglect made the 2022 discharge inevitable. And when it did spill over into the sewer and river, Minhas denied any and all responsibility. So we have charged Mr. Minhas with one count of the following: falsely altering a public record, a 14-year felony; uttering and publishing a false or altered public record, a 14-year felony; substantial endangerment to the public, a 5-year felony; discharge of an injurious substance to waters of the state, a 2-year felony; false statements and omissions regarding air pollution control, a 1-year misdemeanor; and general violations of air pollution control law, punishable by a fine of up to $10,000 for each day that violations occur. Minhas is additionally charged with 11 misdemeanor offenses for violating hazardous waste statutes, permits, or rules. Convictions on these charges would require Minhas to pay for all costs of corrective actions associated with the violations, and in addition, a potential 1 year of incarceration and a fine of up to $25,000. Minhas is charged further with 9 misdemeanor violations of the state's liquid industrial waste law for allegedly discharging industrial byproducts, violating reporting requirements following the discharge, and violating other provisions related to properly labeling chemical containers, maintaining adequate records, and the storage, disposal, protection, and discharge prevention of liquid industrial waste. Each count is punishable by a 6-month term of incarceration and or a $1,000 to $2,500 fine for each day that the violation occurred. In addition to these significant incarceration penalties, Minhas is also facing in total more than $1 million in fines for these many violations. These charges are predicated on the alleged facts that Minhas illegally discharged polluting chemicals and oil into the Flint River on June of 2022, that this discharge posed a substantial endangerment to the public health, safety, or welfare, that Mr. Minhas ordered an employee to falsify records detailing how hazardous materials were handled on site, that he failed to take immediate action and notify authorities after committing the discharge to the city sewer and river, and as was later discovered, that Minhas failed to label containers and tanks at the Lockhart facility or maintain or keep appropriate records of industrial chemical products, that he failed to meet the storage requirements for the chemicals and he kept and created on site, that he kept these chemicals in unpermitted surface impoundments contrary to the law, that he failed to fulfill record retention requirements for such a facility, and that Minhas had failed to satisfy the air quality requirements. Now, the Lockhart site and facility has been secure for quite some time as Lockhart goes through bankruptcy. It is under the supervision of an appointed bankruptcy trustee who works closely with EGLE and the EPA to ensure that it's managed properly and that there's no threat of any further release. Those who run a business have a responsibility to ensure their operations do not jeopardize public health or the environment, especially our precious water resources. Nowhere should that responsibility to respect the public waterways be more obvious than here in the city of Flint. Blatant neglect and disregard of this responsibility cannot and will not be tolerated, and we will continue to make sure that those who fail in this important duty are met with the full force of law. So, thank you all, and thanks to Sheriff Swanson, and I think we'll take questions at this time.
Steve. Attorney General, how does this prosecution compare to other cases of industrial mistakes? I mean, is this the most serious number of charges you've ever handled down?
Yeah, I think it is since I've been in office. I will say that it is unusual to charge criminally these types of lapses as significant as they are. But this was really a special set of circumstances. And, obviously there were multiple actions that were taken by EGLE since 2016. And, of course, improper storage notifications. There's a long list of issues and chronic neglect that was unlikely to ever be resolved absent criminal charges. This was a particularly egregious set of circumstances, and as such, we felt the need to charge criminally.
Right. You had mentioned that Mr. Minhas had ordered an employee to falsify the record. Was there a pattern of this that you found? Is this something that went on regularly at Lockhart or for an extended period of time?
Right. Do you want to answer that?
We have records that reflect that, and it wasn't just a single event.
Attorney General, do you think the lawmakers who skipped session last week should have been arrested?
I am incredibly disappointed with how the session ended. Obviously, I think that there were a lot of individuals that I think were at fault for not completing the session, and ultimately there are many, many bills that should have been voted on. I know that I'm particularly upset about many of the initiatives that came from our department that will never see the governor's desk. I can name some of them: our consumer protection amendments, human trafficking, guardianship, and conservatorship reforms. The list goes on and on and on. And those are just some of them. But with that, I'll probably have more to say on this issue later, and I know that you'll be attending a roundtable that we're going to be having in January. I'm happy to discuss this further at that time.
Thank you. I'm going to go to Mike here.
Can we talk why it took so long to come out with this announcement? And then two, can you speak to the fact, you mentioned that the site is secure at this point, but are there contaminants that EGLE is monitoring that could be leaching back into our water system at any point, and what's happening with all of that?
Yeah. In terms of how long it took to get from this bill in 2022 till now, obviously the state's first priority was to make sure that the release of chemicals from Lockhart's facility was contained, and that human health and safety were adequately protected. And then after that, the criminal investigation involved consulting with the experts at Eagle to determine exactly what had happened and what charges were appropriate. And it was a very thorough and comprehensive investigation with multiple agencies, which can take a lot of time. But obviously what was important is that we got it right, and we think that we did. In terms of whether or not there is a continuing issue, I think that has all been addressed. I will say in terms of what, if any, health impacts we saw or continue to see, we're not aware of any negative impacts for residents in the area, largely because of the prompt response by local first responders and emergency management personnel, Eagle, the EPA. But the impacted area was large. Oily discharge was seen on the water for as far as 20 miles downstream, and oil had to be cleaned off of turtles by hand, as was noted by the sheriff. But that oily discharge, more than 14,000 gallons of it, was contained, and it was collected before it could charge any more damage to the environment and the communities in the area. And Eagle also performed local air quality testing, and they confirmed that there is no danger to the public from compounds in the air. Sheriff, do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I will tell you, this is a criminal investigation, but it's a scientific criminal investigation. I can tell you it's the largest environmental investigation this office has ever had in its history. And when you look at partners that the Attorney General just mentioned, there's a lot of data recovery. And when you use that and you combine it, it's always wanting to be sooner, but we're here. And the thing that I want to remind people of is, number one, the water is safe. And Lockhart's not the only plant or the only business along any waterway in Genesee County or beyond that has the potential of tomorrow having a breach. But the water from this has been contained, and it's been clean, and it's safe. And as I've promised, as the Attorney General have to the people of Flint and Genesee County, as your sheriff, as your AG, we're going to hold people accountable who do what he did.
Thank you very much. We'll go back to Steve. I got time for a couple more after that.
Attorney General, any comment on the president's commutations today in the death penalty cases, including the one involving the Michigan one?
Yeah, I mean, I just read about it this morning a little bit. President Biden has made it clear that except for in certain types of aggravating circumstances, he doesn't believe that the death penalty is appropriate. I think what we saw at the end of the Trump administration last time was sort of a rush to execute as many people as possible. And I think just in the last few weeks of his administration last time, he executed, I think, about 4 individuals, 3, I think, just in the last week that he was in office. And, I think it's fair to say that President Biden didn't want to see that again, and except for in those rare instances, and I think there were 3 individuals, my understanding is that he did not commute their sentences from the death penalty to life in prison, that the rest of those individuals now will not be facing the death penalty. And I think that's a promise that he made when he ran for office. I think it was long-standing. It has been his policy, and he fulfilled that commitment.
Thank you. I'm just going to ask, we're going to do a couple more, and if we could keep it on to today's prosecutions out of respect for our host here today. Art?
Yes, being that Lockhart had been in violation since 2009, and in the last report that was given, Outfall 1, the liner and the lining of Outfall 1 has to be replaced. Being in bankruptcy, Lockhart doesn't have to pay for it. The city is responsible for it. Do you think that you all working on behalf of the city, can you all have them to make it to where instead of paying creditors first, they pay for this outfall so that the Flint residents being poisoned don't have to pay for this? And also, back in 2014, being that Outfall 1 was in front of the Flint water intake while we was on the water, who was supposed to test and make sure that any spills or if any contamination was coming through to where it didn't go into the water plant and come out to the city during the time that we was on the water.
Well, I don't have the answer to those questions, do you?
I will, you're right, it's a 2009, you referred, 2014. I will tell you, you, Mr. Woodson, and so many other advocates for the people have asked questions that unfortunately people up here don't have answers to, including that one. But I will tell you this, I agree with you. He should be responsible for every dime that was paid by the people to not only contain and clean up, but also to mitigate it. And whether he's in bankruptcy or not, I can tell you right now that the people, those here, anybody who's paid a tax, have been paying this bill, and it should go back to the one who's responsible for it. I will tell you, our friends from EPA, they have assigned individuals to that site to keep it from happening again. But I wish I could go back retrospectively and say, you're going to pay for this, you're going to pay for this, you're going to pay for this, because the people of the city of Flint don't deserve that.
All right, thank you, everybody. I'm going to close it out with one from Beth. Beach Raiders.
Attorney General, one more question. With Trump coming into the presidency and obviously putting in a whole new cabinet, do you have worries about their disposition towards Line 5 and how that might affect your litigation seeking to shut down the line?
Yeah, we don't believe that that federal activity is going to affect our state case. Obviously, the Sixth Circuit made a determination that the case would be properly remanded back to the state, and we're hoping that Judge Jamo will act swiftly. We've had outstanding these motions for summary disposition for quite some time, and obviously he's asked for some further briefing, which we're supplying. So we're hoping to move this case through the state system as swiftly as possible, and no, at this juncture, we don't believe that the new federal administration should impede upon that process.
Thank you very much, everybody, for joining us. We will be having a press release coming out digitally over the next, I want to say 20 minutes, and every time I do, it winds up being 40.